Good morning, my dear students. We will be discussing about urolithiasis today. As all of you know, our system from kidney to ureter to bladder to urethra is prone to develop stones, calculi. So it is very important for us to understand that where stone is forming, how it is being formed, why it is being formed, how we can get rid of it, and then what precautions should we take so that it should not recur. I will be taking a sort of overview. Then each segment of it will be a different lecture in due course. As you can see in the diagram, that as I was telling, right from kidney up to the urethra, you can have calculus. Usually the formation of calculus is in the kidney or it is inside the bladder because of the secondary infection or retention. I will be discussing the topic under headings of incidence, types of stone, etiology or risk factors, the clinical feature or the presentation, their symptoms, their signs, the complications if you are not going to operate or you are not going to treat, investigations, of course, then the treatment and how you can prevent it, that is prevention and from recurrence. If you look into the incidence, it affects about 12% of total global population. It is that common disease, and nearly 15% of the population in the northern India, they are suffering from renal stones. Why? Because the temperature is hot and humid, they keep on sweating. That could be one of the reasons why it is so common in the northern regions. And almost 20% of all the urinary stones, they are found in ureter, and out of those ureteric calculi, 70% of the stone, they are found in the lower third of the ureter. As I told you, it is more common in the hot climate, and if you treat it, if the stone disappears from the body, then the lifetime recurrence rate is 50%. That means even if we are cured of the stone, then we need to take precautions so that there should be no recurrence. If you talk about the types of the stone, then the stones may be with calcium or stones may be without calcium. The stones which are with calcium are calcium oxalate, calcium phosphate, or can be mixed. And the stone without calcium can be struvoid, that is magnesium ammonium phosphate, 50 to 20%. Then you have uric acid calculi, there you have got cystine calculi. As you can see in the slide, the percentage wise, the stone with the calcium, they are 70% and rest of them are 30%. And out of them, the struvoid percentage is 15 to 20%. All the stones which are rich in calcium, they are radiopaque. You can see in the X-ray. And the stones which do not have calcium, they are faintly radiopaque or they are not visible in the X-ray, radiolucent, like cystine stone and the uric acid, they are not visible. As far as the etiology and the risk factors are concerned, you have to understand the basic principle of physics. Whenever any fluid is concentrated, its crystal will crystallize and they will form and they will grow and form a stone. The same happens with the urine also. If urine is concentrated because of any reasons, the chances of stone formation are great. Like if the person is taking less fluid, patient is chronically dehydrated, person is living in the hot climate, doing work so much so there is excessive sweating but not taking adequate fluid, all these persons, they are prone to develop renal stone. UTI per se, because it forms a nidus, leads to stone formation. Whenever there is obstruction in the urinary tract, either because of the prostate, or because of the bladder neck obstruction, because of the stricture of the urethra, or if you talk about the unilateral, because of the ureteric stricture, there is a hydronephrosis or the pelvic ureteric junction obstruction, PUJ obstruction, what we call that. Then due to this obstruction, the urinary stasis is there, and you can very well understand when there is a lesser amount of flow of urine, the urine stays, then the crystals, they crystallize and form the stone. Prolonged recumbency, patient is lying down for a very long period because of the orthopedic disease, because of the neurological disease, then there is a mobilization of calcium from bones. Relatively the blood level of the calcium is more of the calcium is excreted, and the chances of developing the calcium stone is increased. It has been observed that the obesity and the mental stress, again they are the minor risk factors. Exact correlation is not known, but they have been observed as a risk factors. The diet factors is very important. See, the diet factor depends upon what type of stone you are having. The oxalate stones, they are common in the persons who are taking oxalate rich diet, like the green leafy vegetables, the cashew nut. All these things are to be seen, because in the prevention of the recurrence, we have to take care of this dietary factor also. Suppose a patient is having uric acid stone, that person may be having stone due to high protein diet. We have to restrict the protein diet, like the red meat, the green pea. So all these things are to be taken care of. The diet factors are also very important when you are talking about the stone formation as well as prevention from recurrence. Then certain diseases, they are common to produce or to cause renal stones, like gout, where there is a increased uric acid. Then there are certain diseases which can be hereditary, like the hypercalciuria, hypercystinuria, hyperoxaluria. These are the diseases which are genetic, hereditary, and if they are there, they will cause the formation of stone. Hyperparathyroidism, when your parathyroid gland is active, then chances of stone formation are more. Rather, when you are having bilateral stone or multiple stones, then you have to really check for the hyperparathyroidism. What hyperparathyroidism is it is a disease of bones, stones and mones. Certain drugs like antacids and indinavir, they are also associated with increased stone formation. So we have to take care of all these things. Coming to clinical features and presentations, because of the stone, patient may be having presentation, or because of the complication, patient may be having presentation. Many patients may be asymptomatic until the stone enlarges to a great size, causing complication. Especially true about the phosphate stones. They silently increase in size. The patient does not know. When the patient feels any problem, gets the X-ray done, finds that there is a large stone. So it can be asymptomatic. Then the pain is the main symptom of the stone. Pain depends upon the site of the stone formation. Suppose the stone is inside the kidney, the patient will have lumbar pain, that is what we call as from back to front in the loin. When the stone is inside the ureter, that again patient feels pain from loin to groin. That means because of the ureter is also supplied by the genitofemoral nerve, the L1, L2. The pain radiates from loin to groin, medial side of the thigh. So if the patient is having ureteric stone, that sort of pain will be there. If patient has got bladder stone, then patient will feel pain at the tip of penis. Usually they are child, they keep on rubbing their penis. So you immediately come to know that patient may be having vesical calculus. So that pain symptom depends upon the site of the stone. Then the hematuria, because of the irritation, because of the epithelial damage, patient is having either microscopic hematuria or the macroscopic hematuria. Or you can say the painful hematuria, the most important cause is urinary stone. Then because of the recurrent UTI, patient may be having fever. The fever of the UTI is always with chills and rigor. So if the patient is coming to you with fever, with chills and rigor, and it is having recurrence, then you should suspect about stone. Strangury, what does it mean? Strangury means patient feels urge to micturate, but whenever he or she goes, the urine does not pass, only few drops of blood comes out. So that is because of inflammation of trigone. When the stone is irritating the trigonal area of the bladder, then this strangury occurs. Or there is a stone in the uretrovesical junction, it is stuck up over there, irritating trigone, then it may happen. Apart from that, patient may be having general symptoms. Suppose there is a ureteric colic, then with that colic, patient will be having nausea, may be having vomiting. All these things can be there. You will find no finding when you will examine the patient, you may find no finding. But if the patient has got some sort of complication like obstruction, because of the stone there is obstruction, the proximally what will happen? The kidney will swell, there will be hydronephrosis, you can find the renal lump. Then this hydronephrosis may get infected, may have pyonephrosis, you can have painful lump with fever. So all these things you need to see, as you have to keep in mind whenever you are looking into a patient of renal stone. Sometimes stone may obstruct the urethra, you may be having retention of the urine. So as I told you, if you are treating the patient timely, nothing is going to happen. But if you are not treating the patient, patient neglects the disease, or the patient is having asymptomatic calculi, then the complications which are most common are recurrent UTI, patient may be having back pressure, hydronephrosis, which may get infected into pyonephrosis, and if the patient is having single kidney or there is bilateral renal stones, then patient may even have renal failure. Now, how should you do the investigation? What investigations are done? Just an overview. First of all, you need to do the urine analysis to know about the crystals and the RBCs. See, in the microscopic hematuria, you have to look for the RBCs, and then what type of crystals patient is passing, phosphate, uric acid or oxalate, you can very well observe in the urine. Culture and sensitivity you need to do for the sake of infection. Then the blood investigations, all the CBC, uric acid, urea, creatinine, all the things, hemoglobin, everything, routine blood investigations to rule out the kidney dysfunction, and moreover to find out the if they can cause like uric acid, you need to do. Then the plain X-ray, KUB, that is kidney, ureter and bladder, that is the AP X-ray, anterior posterior X-ray of the abdomen. Because the kidney is situated posteriorly, that is why you put the film posteriorly, and you take the AP X-ray and you find that the radio-opaque, the stones which are having calcium, they are radio-opaque. 90% of the stone, they are visible on the plain X-ray, 10% stone are radiolucent. Then you need to do, suppose you are contemplating any procedure, then you need to do intravenous urogram. That is, you introduce a dye and then you keep on taking picture, the X-ray film at intervals, and then you find that what is happening beyond that. The anatomy means you need to see the anatomy of the renal tract through IVU, and in those patients where you are having radiolucent stone, but there is history suggestive of renal stone, ureteric stone, you have to do IVU. Ultrasonography again you can do, and that is not a very good investigation for the stone, but yes, for the knowing the kidney size, hydronephrosis, you will come to know with the ultrasonography. Non-contrast CT is the gold standard for ureteric calculi. Non-contrast CT is gold standard for ureteric calculi. You can enhance your CT also, but NCCT remains the gold standard. And then what we forget, we remove the stone, give it to the patient, we do not do stone analysis. That stone analysis will tell you what type of stone this patient is having, and accordingly you will advise him or her the diet. So stone analysis is very important investigations which we usually omit or forget. That is either through XRD, that is the X-ray crystallography, or infrared spectroscopy. The stone analysis is important. And of course, when you are suspecting some sort of hereditary or metabolic disease, you have to go for the metabolic workup as well. Now here you have to see the X-ray characteristics. I was talking about few stones are radiolucent, few are radiopaque, and few are having poor radiopacity. So you can see in the table that the calcium oxalate dihydrate, calcium oxalate monohydrate and calcium phosphate stone, they are radiopaque, 70% radiopaque. Then the poorly visible stone, that is the magnesium ammonium phosphate, is true white. The apatite and the cysteine, they are faintly radiopaque. Then the radiolucent stone, which are not at all visible, they are the uric acid stone, the xanthine stone, or the stone due to drug. They are the stone which are not visible on the X-ray. You need to do the CCT or you need to do IVU. Now, if you take the overview of the treatment part, the treatment is, number one is watchful waiting. Why? Because few of the stones, they pass on their own. You have to give just a painkiller, tell about the diet therapy, diet control, a lot of fluids, and the stone will pass. That we will take up in another lecture where we need to do watchful waiting or not, but watchful waiting is another one option. Then you have to manage the pain, and for the pain management, diclofenac is the drug of choice. That diclofenac intramuscular, if you are giving, that is a drug of choice for the pain management of the ureteric colic or the renal colic. Then you have medical expulsion therapy, that means you give some drugs. I will take a different lecture. That means through medicine you can get rid of the stone also, but that depends upon the indications from patient to patient, it differs. We will take up in our next lecture. ESWL, that is the extracorporeal shock wave lithotripsy, or commonly what we call as lithotripsy. Here the patient is not being operated, there is no cut. Again, there are certain indications, not in all the patients you can do for that. The PCNL, that is the percutaneous nephrolithotomy. Again, there are indications. You pass in a nephroscope, a small hole, and then through that small hole you break the stone and remove the stone. That is the PCNL. Then URS, ureterorhinoscopy, means what? Through cystoscope, through the urethral meatus, you pass ureteroscope, and that ureteroscope goes into the ureter, and then you break the ureteric stone and take it out. Litholapexy is basically for vesical calculus. You crush the stone, or you do the some sort of pneumatic litholapexy. The stone is crushed or it is broken within the bladder and it is removed. Sometimes you are not able to remove the stone through non-invasive or minimally invasive technique. In that situation, you need to do surgery. This surgery could be either laparoscopic or it can be open. That depends upon the indication, from patient to varies from patient to patient. So all those things, they are all different lectures. So this overview I just told you because you should know these are the options available for the treatment. These are the options available for the investigations. This is the symptom, this is the sign, then this is the incidence, or these are the causative factors. Just an overview. As I told you, if you are going to treat the pain, because you have to keep the patient pain free, and for that the drug of first choice is diclofenac. And again I will take up the role of tamsulosin, that is the alpha blocker, when I will be discussing about the medical expulsion of the stone. Then I will be telling you basically you should know that when you are using this alpha blocker, this reduces the frequency of analgesic injections. This is important for you to know that I was talking about the watchful waiting. See, the stone which are less than 5 millimeter size, they have got 75% chance to pass on its own regardless of its location, whether they are in kidney or ureter or in the bladder. Less than 5 millimeter, they 75% they usually pass on their own. That is why I am telling you the watchful waiting is important. If the stone is 5 to 7 millimeter, the chances of spontaneous passage is 60%. If the stone size is 7 to 9 millimeter, the chances are 48%. If stone is more than 9 millimeter, the chances are 25%. So as the stone size increases, the chances of spontaneous passage, they go on decreasing. Also, it depends if the stones are in the ureter, then where they are located. This is also important for you to know that if the stones they are located in the lower ureter, the chances of spontaneous passage is 75%, when in the mid ureter 60% and the proximal ureter is 48%. While if they are stuck up at the UV junction, then with the help by your conservative treatment 79% of the stone they will pass, and usually the time taken for spontaneous passage is 1 month. If it is not passing even after 1 month, then they need certain intervention. Once we talk about the open surgery, then you should remember at least these names. When there is a renal stone, the name of operation is nephrolithotomy or pyelolithotomy. When it is in the ureter, it is ureterolithotomy. When it is in the bladder, it is suprapubic cystolithotomy. When it is in the urethra and you need to do certain operation, it is urethrolithotomy. So you remember the name. The lithotomy means removal of stone, and rest name depends upon the site being involved. Though I will be telling this again and again in my upcoming lectures, but you need to prevent the recurrence after the patient is being treated. Why? Because a lifetime recurrence, I told you, it is more than 50%. So you have to teach the patient about the water therapy, adequate food intake, and then the dietary modification depending upon the type of stone the patient is having. You have to tell about the dietary modification. That is why the stone analysis is important. So I think I have given you the brief bird's eye view overview about this renal calculi or the urolithiasis. Then we will be taking one by one in upcoming lectures. Right, say in the next lecture I will be taking medical expulsion therapy, MET, for ureteric stone. Thank you very much.